Welcome back. Democrats on Capitol Hill open their public hearings on the impeachment of President Trump. A warning from the Federal Reserve Chair for Congress and a presidential candidate questions Iowa's first in the nation status for the nomination process. All things we'll talk about this morning with former Illinois State Senator Mike Jacobs and Scott County Republican Party Chair David Millage. Great to see you both.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
So let's start with the Iowa caucuses. Every 4 years, it seems, Iowa's first in the nation caucus status in the presidential nomination comes under scrutiny. It happened this week from Democratic candidate Julian Castro. He argues neither Iowa nor New Hampshire really represent the current demographics of the country. Both states mostly white compared to other states that have more diverse populations. He is Latino and not necessarily polling well in Iowa. Of course, not a new argument. What is the likelihood either party will change that schedule, and what do you think would be the impetus that would require for that to happen? David, you're the Iowa guy, so I want to start with you on this one.
Well, I don't think there's any impetus to change it. This is one.
Is there something that would eventually potentially be an impetus, do you think?
No, I can't think of one right now.
Sure.
But this is something where the Democrats and Republicans are united. We work with our Democratic colleagues to assure that Iowa's first in the nation is maintained, and I don't see nothing that currently that's going to change that. Certainly, there's a disappointed candidate that he's not polling well in Iowa, but Iowa's a unique state, and it requires candidates to engage in retail politics. You have to go out and meet the voters. You don't necessarily need a big campaign purse to go out and buy multimedia ads on the networks and on Facebook and all the other medium that are out there. So,
yeah, handshaking and meeting people and answering questions helps a lot.
That's retail politics.
And people pay close attention to it too.
And they do, and that's a credit to Iowa's population and electorate that they are engaged and they do ask tough questions and they make candidates get out and meet the people.
Mike, I guess you probably agree with it. He says there's bipartisan agreement on this sort of thing, that Iowa really has an important role to play.
It's a very important role. I do like the idea that people can meet and greet everybody in the state if you really care to. But I do think there is some points about lack of representation. Illinois is a state of 12 million people, and our diversity is 70% white, 14% black, and 10% Hispanic, and then other. And Iowa, unfortunately, not unfortunately, it's just more white, more homogeneous. And it just seems to me that people can point to that as a problem, but I think Iowa's place is well preserved, especially when they elected Barack Obama. So that sort of shows to me that the diversity question really is a factor.
People are open to the quality of the candidate and look past the other things.
Of course, yeah.
Well, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned lawmakers on Capitol Hill this week. Powell says the national debt could hurt Congress's ability to respond if the economy weakens. He went so far to call on lawmakers to put the budget on a sustainable path. He called it unsustainable right now. The Trump tax cuts were not matched with cuts in spending. So I guess how serious is this likely to be taken on Capitol Hill, and can it be the catalyst to a realistic budget compromise? Mike?
Yeah, you have to do something on the deficit. When the president ran for office, he said he's going to eliminate the deficit in 8 years. I hope he's going to do really well in the next 4, because in the first 4, he's increased the deficit.
So you've already asked him, you're expecting Trump to serve another 4 years.
Well, he may or may not, but I would expect him to live up to his promise. But so far, what he's done is he's increased the deficit by 50%. And I'm a conservative Democrat, and I know my friend's a Republican, and I think we both can remember the days when deficits were bad. And right now, it seems like anything you want to spend, you can spend. And nobody's putting it was caution in the wind, and nobody's thinking about how it's going to affect our children and grandchildren.
When we hear a warning like this from the Federal Reserve Chair, that's actually a pretty loud siren that should be heard, but is it something that will be heard?
I doubt it, because every time the politicians, it's not their fault, but every time they put together some kind of a compromise or some kind of a budget reduction bill, it can't get out of Congress because everybody.
They've got their own
entrenched
positions.
And they're not, it's not going to, I don't see anything that's going to change that right now. I mean, George W. Bush tried to take on entitlements at the start of his second term, and his second term, then he became ineffective after that because he'd spent all of his political capital trying to reduce entitlement spending. And in 2015 or 2014, Paul Ryan put together a plan that would have moved us towards a more sustainable budget over the course of 8 to 10 years, I think it was, and it was shot down because nobody wants to see their program cut. And you talk about Trump's tax cuts, and after Trump's tax cuts, revenue did increase. The revenue to the federal government increased after the tax cuts. It's just that the spending.
Well, that's what my point was. That spending itself wasn't addressed on that side. And it's funny how Mark Sanford, who just got out of the campaign for president was what his biggest talking point was about the national debt. Now to the formal impeachment hearings on Capitol Hill. There was no avoiding them if you turn on the TV during the day starting Wednesday. And of course, Friday, acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine William Taylor was one of the first witnesses. He testified about the president's decision to cut $400 million in aid to Ukraine. And he read a text he sent to the president's ambassador to the European Union about it during an exchange with the Democrats' prosecutor Daniel Goldman.
I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign.
What did you mean when you said you thought it was crazy?
Security assistance was so important for Ukraine as well as our own national interest. It was counterproductive to all of what we had been trying to do. It was illogical. It could not be explained. It was crazy.
Republicans tried to paint him as the Democrats' star witness in the case. He felt strongly that pulling support from Ukraine in its fight against Russia didn't make sense. It's hard to make the case that he was actually being partisan. The Democrats argue that the initial freeze on financial aid was to pressure Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. I guess how serious is what we heard so far from the testimony of Ambassador Taylor and, for that matter, State Department official George Kent? Mike, what do you think?
Well, you know, I have some experience in this area, impeachment. I helped impeach Governor Rod Blagojevich, so I'm one of 59 senators in Illinois' history that have moved on impeachment. It's a very serious matter. You know, impeachment is a crime against the government. And in this case, Democrats are saying that the president tried to bribe an official with federal money. They're saying he didn't even use his own money, that he was using our money. And I think that goes to the president being just a little bit confused sometimes. And I think his confusion centers around the fact that he works for us. We don't work for him. And I just think if he back up a little bit and quit fighting so much and just get rid of the chaos, that the whole country would be better off.
David, how serious do you think the testimony was that we heard so far?
I don't think it's serious at all. I think it's a sham. The Democrats have been trying to impeach Trump since he took off, since the day after he was elected.
Well, they've held off on doing anything until now, obviously.
But they were going to move on the Mueller investigation. Trump colluded with Russia. They couldn't. There was nothing to indicate that he had colluded with Russia. So then it was collusion. He colluded with Russia. Well, they couldn't prove that either because they hadn't colluded with Russia. They're trying to throw things against the wall, seeing if something would stick, and it's much ado about nothing. I don't think there's been an impeachable offense committed, and they should move on. If you want to investigate the dealings with Ukraine, fine, but it's not an impeachable offense.
We'll see how that all plays out. We'll see if it actually gets to the Senate. I guess what kind of influence, do you think public opinion could have on the outcome of the impeachment process? If there are certain sways a certain way, do you think it'll change positions in Capitol Hill?
I don't think it will, because I think people's minds are made up. You're either for impeachment or you're against impeachment right now, and the country is divided too.
I think, though, that sometimes as there's more indictments and more convictions. Stone was convicted today. Flynn's been convicted. So is Manafort. Giuliani looks like to be on his way. The two gentlemen from Ukraine. So as these things happen, politicians on the Senate side who make the decision if it's actually a crime or not, there's going to be a lot more pressure on them. So right now, I don't think we really have a full story of what's about to happen here, because I think once people see what happened, they're going to shake their head and really wonder who the president was working for, himself or for us as taxpayers.
Do you think those relationships matter when you see what all the people who were in line associates with the president being convicted?
I don't think that amounts to a high crime or a misdemeanor. Having incompetent people working for you does not constitute a high crime or misdemeanor. That's what the Constitution says. High crimes or misdemeanors.
But it's nothing very specific in what a high crime or misdemeanor is either.
Well, a high crime or misdemeanor is what Congress deems it to be.
Sure, exactly. So that's where we're at right now. Guys, David Milledge, Mike Jacobs, thanks so much for the conversation. I think it was very insightful. That brings us to our question, Luke. What are your impressions of the impeachment hearings so far? Send your answer by email to fortherecord@whbf.com, or respond to this post on Facebook at the Local 4 News WHBF TV page, or on my page.